October 3rd, 1944. Vosges foothills, eastern France. A German security officer stepped onto the porch of a village schoolhouse with a folded carbon copy in his gloved hand. He did not shout. He did not run. He placed the paper flat against the schoolhouse door, lifted a small brass hammer, and drove one nail through the top margin. Behind him, in the apple orchard beside the road, 27 civilians lay where his men had left them. The youngest was 12. The oldest was a retired baker who still had flour dried into the cuffs of his coat. The officer turned the paper once with 2 fingers, making sure the unit stamp was visible. Then he climbed into his car and drove toward the German border with the original order tucked safely inside his dispatch case. His name was Otto Weiss. He believed the stamp on that paper made the killings official. He believed the signature made them legal. He believed the original copy in his dispatch case made him untouchable. He was wrong, because 7 miles away, in the back of an American Jeep bouncing over a road crater, Captain Samuel Adler was carrying a gray metal card box on his knees. Inside that box were 23 names, each written on a red index card. Each card had dates, villages, witnesses, unit numbers, typewriter defects, ink colors, license plates. The small, boring details a murderer forgets to fear. And by sunrise, Adler would understand something no one at headquarters had seen yet. Otto Weiss was not running from justice. He was carrying it with him. The autumn of 1944 did not look like the clean arrow lines drawn on campaign maps. From the air, Allied movement across eastern France seemed direct. On the ground, it was broken into fuel shortages, ruined bridges, wrong turns, abandoned villages, civilian refugees, and German rear units moving through the gaps like smoke through a cracked wall. The front had outrun its own paperwork that created a dangerous kind of darkness. Some towns were no longer firmly German. They were not yet firmly Allied. In those spaces, SS security detachments did what they had been trained to do for years. They punished, they counted, they recorded. Their violence was not always chaotic. That was the part Captain Adler understood better than most soldiers. The men who burned barns and shot hostages did not think of themselves as criminals hiding evidence. They thought of themselves as officials completing a procedure. A reprisal had a file number. A transfer had a receipt. An execution had a witness list. A village fine had a stamped copy for the district office. The Reich had taught its clerks to believe that if a crime was written in triplicate, the paper would somehow absorb the guilt. Adler had built his war around proving the opposite. Before the army, Samuel Adler had worked in the Municipal Records Division in Newark, New Jersey. He was 38 years old, narrow, shouldered, left-handed, and so soft-spoken that new lieutenants sometimes mistook him for a chaplain. He could remember a tax parcel number after seeing it once. He could identify the clerk who typed a form by the way. The letter E struck too low on the page. He had been raised above his uncle's tailor shop by parents, who had left Galicia in 1919 with 2 suitcases, 4 silver spoons, and a silence around the relatives who had not left. When the army discovered he could read German administrative script as easily as other men read road signs, it sent him to intelligence. When captured papers began piling up behind the front, Adler stopped seeing paper. He saw fingerprints. By October 1944, his card box held 23 SS officers believed to be operating across the Vosges corridor. Not battlefield commanders, not famous men, security captains, police liaison officers, district punishment officers, the men who signed forms after other men fired rifles. One red card was thicker than all the others. Otto Weiss, SS Hauptsturmführer, 46. Former police administrator from Bremen, current commander of Security Detachment 17. B. Adler had never met him, but he knew him. He knew Weiss used violet carbon paper supplied from a depot outside Colmar. He knew Weiss preferred the phrase, preventive public measure, when describing executions. He knew Weiss's field typewriter had a chipped lower, case R. He knew Weiss signed in a hard downward stroke that tore cheap paper at the end of his surname. And he knew Weiss had one habit that made him dangerous and vulnerable at the same time. He kept originals. Most retreating officers destroyed their files once the front came close. Weiss did not. He carried them. Not out of guilt. Out of pride. He believed records proved command discipline. He believed one day, after the confusion passed, the surviving state would reward men who had been orderly while everyone else panicked. That belief was sitting in a leather dispatch case on the passenger seat of his staff car when he left the schoolhouse door in St. Remy-les Boys. The 1st American Patrol reached the village at dusk. Lieutenant Paul Merrick of the 79th Infantry found the schoolhouse door before he found the orchard. The paper was still nailed there. The top line read, Security Measure 48. B. The bottom line carried Weiss's name. Merrick did not remove it. He posted 2 guards beside the door and sent a radio message back through division. 31 minutes later, Adler was on the road. He arrived after dark, stepping down from the jeep with his card box under one arm and a flashlight in his teeth. The villagers had lit no lamps. The only light came from the jeep headlights and a single lantern held by the schoolmaster, a stooped man whose hands shook so badly the flame kept ticking against the glass. Adler looked at the door. He looked at the nail. Then he leaned close to the paper without touching it. Violet carbon. Chipped R downward tier on the signature. Weiss. Adler opened the card box on the hood of the jeep and pulled the thick red card from the middle row. He did not say the name aloud. Not yet. He copied the order number. He copied the timestamp. He copied the unit designation. Then he asked for a map. The schoolmaster brought one from a classroom drawer. It was a child's geography map, with ink rivers and torn corners and colored borders already made useless by the war. Adler spread it on the hood and placed 3 pebbles on it. Saint Armai, the last village where Weiss had taken fuel. The last place a resistance courier had reported his vehicles moving east. The pebbles formed a shallow line toward a narrow road through the forest and a stone quarry. 3 kilometers short of the border road. Adler turned to Merrick. How many vehicles? Merrick answered immediately. 2 trucks, 1 staff car, maybe 30 men. Local farmers heard engines stop at the quarry after nightfall. Why there? Cover, Merrick said, and the road beyond it is cratered. They will wait for engineers or daylight. Adler stared at the map. He will not wait for daylight. Merrick looked up. Why not? Because he left a public copy on the door, Adler said. That means the original is already signed and packed. He considers this closed. Adler put the card back into the box. Men like Weiss do not stay near a closed file. The problem was not knowing where Weiss had gone. The problem was permission. The quarry sat just across a corps boundary, inside a sector assigned to a different command whose tanks were stalled for fuel. Merrick could block the village roads. He could send scouts. He could not legally push a reinforced patrol into the quarry without authorization that might take hours. Adler had seen that delay before. War crime suspects survived in the space between correct procedures. A request moved up. A signature came down. By then, a man with papers and a car had crossed a river, changed uniforms, and become someone else's problem. At 21:10, Adler sent a priority message to G2 headquarters. At 21:34, the answer returned. Hold present line. Maintain security forward documentation for review. Merrick read the reply twice. That is it. Adler closed his card box. No. He walked outside, past the schoolhouse steps, to the orchard fence. He did not enter the orchard. He stood where the lantern light ended, and looked toward the dark tree line. Merrick followed him. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Adler said, "If he crosses the border with the originals, every future prosecutor will have to argue from fragments. If we take him with that dispatch case, he argues against himself." Merrick kept his voice low. "And if headquarters says no?" Adler turned back toward the schoolhouse. "Then we ask a different question." That different question came from Major Eleanor Rourke, a judge advocate officer attached to the same headquarters. Rourke was 42, a former county prosecutor from Iowa, and one of the few people in the command who understood that law could move quickly if it was aimed at the right target. Adler reached her by field telephone just before 10 o'clock. He did not ask for a pursuit order. He described the schoolhouse door. He described the signed public copy. He described the likelihood that the original file was still with Weiss. Then he asked whether an active enemy officer carrying operational records through a contested boundary could be stopped as a matter of battlefield security. Rourke was silent long enough for Adler to hear paper sliding across her desk. Then she said, "Not if you call it a war crimes arrest." "What do I call it?" "Evidence interdiction." Adler closed his eyes. Rourke continued, "Enemy records in transit. Active detachment. Suspected reprisal command. Risk of destruction. Tactical recovery within immediate operational area. That will hold?" "It will hold long enough," she said. "Do not lose the papers." At 22:18 the order came through. 1 platoon, 2 armored cars, 1 engineer section. Authority to move on the quarry, recover enemy operational records, and detain personnel encountered in possession of them. No speech about justice, no moral declaration, just the right words in the right order. Adler smiled once, very faintly. Institutions rarely change their conscience in time, but they will change their vocabulary. The column moved without headlights. Rain had begun falling in thin diagonal lines, turning the chalk road pale under the clouds. The armored cars crawled ahead like black animals, their crews hunched low, engines coughing under blankets. Adler rode in the second vehicle with the card box between his boots and a folded copy of Rourke's authorization in his breast pocket. At the quarry, Weiss had made camp behind a half-collapsed limestone cutting. His trucks were parked nose, out under camouflage netting. A machine gun covered the road. A second gun covered the track through the trees. Good fieldcraft. Poor imagination. Weiss had prepared for infantry approaching from the road. He had not prepared for an engineer corporal from Minnesota who knew how to crawl through a drainage culvert with 2 men and a coil of wire. At 23:06, Merrick's platoon cut the quarry telephone line. At 23:08, the armored cars rolled into position above the cutting. At 23:09, Adler lifted a field telephone and spoke in German. "Security Detachment 17. B. This is Captain Samuel Adler, United States Army. You are surrounded. Place all weapons on the ground and step into the open with your hands visible." The answer came after 11 seconds. "This is a lawful German police formation. You have no authority over administrative records." Adler looked at Merrick. Merrick shook his head slightly, almost amused. Adler spoke again. "You have 8 minutes." The German voice changed. "Under the Geneva Convention, records belonging to a military office are protected from seizure." Adler glanced at the schoolhouse copy in an evidence sleeve beside him. "Then you should not have nailed one to a school door." The line went dead. The first shot came from the quarry at 23:14. Not a burst. One rifle shot. It snapped past the armored car and struck a tree hard enough to throw bark onto Adler's coat. Merrick gave the order. The fight lasted 6 minutes. Not heroic minutes. Not cinematic minutes. Confused, wet, deafening minutes. A grenade rolled under one of the trucks and blew out both front tires. A German machine gun fired too high and carved white lines across the quarry wall. The engineer corporal's team came out of the drainage culvert behind the second gun and ended it with 3 shots at close range. Then men were shouting in German, "Hands up, weapons down." A flashlight beam swung across faces. Otto Weiss stepped into the rain at the end, coat buttoned, hat still on, one cheek marked with limestone dust. He carried the leather dispatch case in his left hand. An American military policeman took his pistol. Adler took the dispatch case. Weiss looked at him with real indignation. "Those are official records." Adler held the case by the handle. "Yes," he said. "That is why I came." Inside the case were 41 original orders, 12 transfer receipts, 7 reprisal summaries, and a bound notebook with a black cloth cover. The notebook mattered most. It contained village names, hostage counts, execution dates, property seizures, witness lists, and unit initials. Some pages were neat enough to have been copied in an office. Others had been written in the field, in a car, or by lamplight. But all of them connected. The schoolhouse door had not been an isolated atrocity. It was one entry in a system. And near the back of the notebook, on a page marked only with the letter K, Adler found a list of supply drops, courier routes, and 4 names that did not belong to Weiss's detachment. He read them once. Then again. One of them was not German. It belonged to a French resistance contact who had been sending reliable reports to Merrick's division for 3 months. Adler felt the quarry noise recede until all he could hear was the rain hitting the dispatch case. Weiss was not the top of the line. He was a branch. The trunk was still standing, and it already knew the Americans were looking. By dawn, the prisoners were moving west. The papers were wrapped in oilcloth under Adler's coat. Weiss sat in the last truck, hands bound, eyes forward, trying to look like a man temporarily inconvenienced by disorder. At 6:40, a courier jeep caught the column on the road. The driver handed Merrick a message. Merrick read it and said nothing. He passed it to Adler. A forward scout patrol had followed a resistance tip about a German fuel cache at an abandoned sawmill near Le Petit. Pierre. The tip was false. The sawmill had been prepared. Interlocking fire from 2 loft windows. Mortars registered on the yard. 9 Americans dead. 13 wounded. The resistance contact who provided the tip was the same name Adler had just found in Weiss's notebook. Merrick looked at Adler. That was not coincidence. No. Who said it? Adler folded the message carefully. The man Weiss reports to. His name was Franz Kober. SS Sturmbannführer. 51. Before the war, he had run a police records institute in Munich. Inside the security apparatus, Kober had become known for something colder than brutality. Efficiency. He had standardized reprisal forms across 3 occupied regions. He had designed witness intimidation lists that made village leaders complicit on paper. He had taught younger officers how to make murder appear as civil administration. Adler had a red card on Kober too. But Kober's card was not thick. That was what had troubled him for months. A man that important should have left more edges. Instead, Kober appeared as initials, route codes, courier numbers, and second-hand references. A shadow cast by paperwork. Now the shadow had killed 9 Americans. At headquarters, Major Rourke read the sawmill report with her jaw set tight. She did not speak for nearly a minute. Then she placed Weiss's notebook beside it, and drew one line between the compromised resistance name and Kober's initial. Now it is not just evidence interdiction, she said. Adler waited. Rourke tapped the page. Now it is active counterintelligence. By noon, a temporary task group had been formed around Merrick's platoon. Rourke's legal authority, and Adler's red card box. The mission did not say revenge. It did not say punishment. It said, locate and neutralize enemy security network, responsible for compromised Allied intelligence channels and documented reprisal actions. Again, the right words. Again, just enough room to move. Their first lead came from the least dramatic object in Weiss's case. A supply receipt for typewriter ribbon. Violet carbon paper had always pointed to Colmar, but the ribbon receipt carried an inventory stamp from a small commercial print shop in Sainte-Croix, a town sitting inside a contested pocket near the forest line. The print shop had supposedly closed in August. Weiss had received a ribbon shipment from it 9 days earlier. Adler put 3 cards on the table. Weiss Kober. Sainte-Croix Print Cooperative. Then he added the resistance contact's name across the bottom. The shape was not perfect, but it was enough. The task group moved before sunset, not to storm the town, not to surround every building. Adler asked for something stranger. He wanted the post office watched. Merrick stared at him. The print shop is the target. The print shop is a shell, Adler said. Kober does not need ink. He needs movement. If he has a compromised contact, he will not risk meeting him in the shop after Weiss disappears. So where does he meet him? Adler opened Weiss's notebook to the courier codes. Somewhere that makes paper invisible. A mail room. The post office in Sainte-Croix was a narrow building with blue shutters, a tiled roof, and a cracked stone step polished by 50 years of boots. At 1820, a woman in a postal apron unlocked the side door. At 1831, 2 men in civilian coats entered carrying a crate marked school supplies. At 1842, a black Citroën with military tires stopped in the alley for less than a minute. No one got out. A hand passed a brown envelope through the rear window. A watcher across the street made the sign. Merrick's men closed both ends of the alley. The 2 men with the crate reached for pistols and died before they could fire. The woman in the postal apron froze with both hands on the counter. The driver of the Citroën tried to reverse and rammed into a cart of cabbages. The passenger door opened. Franz Kober stepped out with his hands already raised. He did not look like Weiss. No polished anger. No injured pride. Kober looked almost bored. A thin man with silver hair, wire spectacles, and the clean, tired face of a civil servant who had been interrupted after a long day. Rourke approached him with 2 military policemen. Kober spoke English before she did. "I am a police official. You are making a serious procedural mistake." Rourke looked at the crate on the post office floor. "Then procedure will enjoy explaining why school supplies contain radio crystals." Inside the crate were crystals. 1, time pads, forged identity cards, 3 Allied movement summaries, and a folder labeled in German personnel vulnerabilities. Adler opened that folder in the back room of the post office, while rain ticked against the shutters. The first page was a list of American intelligence officers operating in eastern France. Names, ranks, hotels, mess schedules, drivers, favorite routes, family addresses in the United States when available. Adler's name was on page 2. Rourke's name was on page 5. Merrick's division, Ju-2 Chief, was page 7. The file was not for reprisal work. It was for elimination. The machinery had turned around. It was no longer just documenting civilians for punishment. It was documenting the people who documented the punishment. Kober watched Adler read. For the first time, his expression changed. Not fear, recognition. He had expected soldiers. He had expected lawyers. He had not expected a man who understood the beauty and danger of a cross. Reference. Adler closed the folder. How many copies? Kober said nothing. Rourke stepped closer. How many? Kober smiled faintly. Major, in a proper office, there is never only one copy. That was the darkest moment of the investigation. Not the quarry. Not the gunfire. Not even the sawmill report. It was the realization that Kober had built his system with redundancy. one file in Sainte-Croix, one courier line towards Strasbourg, one radio route through the forest, one sleeper clerk inside an Allied administrative depot, who had been moving names long before anyone knew to look. The task group had captured the man. They had not captured the system. And a system designed by a records officer does not die when one office closes. It survives in copies. For the next 36 hours, Adler did not sleep. He sat at a table in the post office sorting captured papers into rows, while Rourke drafted legal orders and Merrick sent patrols into the roads around Sainte-Croix. Every sheet mattered. A torn envelope flap, a railway stamp, a pencil mark beside a delivery date, a smudge of violet carbon on a receipt that should have been typed in black. To most men in the room, it looked like trash. To Adler, it was geography. By the second night, he had built a new map, not of roads, of documents. Every paper in Kober's system moved through three kinds of hands: printers, postal clerks, quartermaster liaisons. Find the overlap, Adler said, and you find the second copy. The overlap was a name buried in an Allied requisition ledger: Marcel Duret, civilian clerk. Hired in June. Assigned to an American supply depot outside Pinel. Approved by a French municipal certificate that had been stamped by the Sainte-Croix post office on a day when the post office was supposedly closed. Merrick wanted to arrest him immediately. Adler refused. If we take Duret at the desk, we get Duret, he said. Rourke understood first. If we let him move, we get the packet. So they let him move. At 5:15 on October 6, Marcel Duret left the depot carrying a lunch tin and a folded raincoat. He walked like a man going to work. He boarded a farm cart. He stepped off near a chapel. He waited in the cemetery until a boy on a bicycle left a tin tube under a broken stone angel. Duret picked up the tube. He had walked 12 steps before Merrick's men came out from behind the wall. The tin tube contained microfilmed pages from Kober's personnel vulnerabilities file. 38 names, routes, room numbers, 2 home addresses, 1 sketch of Adler made from memory. In Duret's coat lining, they found the key to a postal lockbox in Strasbourg. The second copy was inside it. Not complete, but enough. Enough to identify 2 more couriers. Enough to locate the radio set. Enough to expose the sleeper network before it disappeared into the civilian ruins of eastern France. By October 11th, Kober's system was broken. Not wiped from the earth. No system that old dies that cleanly, but broken enough that its couriers could not trust their routes. Its clerks could not trust their mail. And its officers could not trust the paperwork that once protected them. Weiss's originals were sent west under guard. Kober's folders were sealed for prosecution. Duret signed a statement after Rourke placed the microfilm, the lockbox key, and 3 matching postal stamps on the table in front of him. He asked what would happen to him. Rourke answered without raising her voice. The first honest document in your file will be the confession. The war moved on. That is the part stories often forget. No trumpet sounded because one security network collapsed. No newspaper headline announced that a quiet captain with a metal card box had pulled a hidden thread out of the enemy's administrative sleeve. The front kept grinding east. Men still froze in foxholes. Fuel still ran short. Orders still arrived late. But behind the lines, something changed. Officers who once treated captured forms as clutter began sending them to Adler's table. Village statements were logged beside unit stamps. Witness names were protected instead of repeated carelessly through open channels. A murder order was no longer just evidence of one crime. It was a map of the office that produced it. By January 1945, Adler's card box had outgrown the box. 23 names had become 31. 31 had become 46. Some men were captured. Some vanished. Some died in the collapse before any court could reach them. But enough were found with enough of their own records that prosecutors after the war did not have to argue only from grief. They could argue from signatures, from receipts, from carbon copies, from the official language the killers had trusted more than the people they killed. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Samuel Adler was not in a parade. He was in a requisitioned office in Frankfurt, sitting under a cracked ceiling with 4 folders open in front of him. 3 cases still lacked confirmation. 1 witness list was missing. 2 suspects had changed names. A courier route ended at a town that no longer had a town hall. An officer came by and told Adler the war was over. Adler did not look up. For soldiers, he said. He spent 6 more weeks closing what could be closed. Then, the army sent him home. Back in Newark, he returned to records work. Same city, same paper smell, same careful hands. A young clerk once asked why Mr. Adler used red index cards only for certain files. Adler said red was harder to misplace. That was all. He never wrote a memoir. He never lectured about the quarry. He never told the story of the schoolhouse door at dinner parties. In 1958, Major Eleanor Rourke, by then a federal attorney, wrote a 74-page training memorandum on wartime evidence recovery and network tracing. She described the method. Start with the public document. Identify the hand that signed it. Track the materials that produced it. Follow the copy chain. Separate performative paperwork from operational paperwork. Do not assume the top signature is the top mind. Never let a bureaucrat keep his archive. The memorandum circulated quietly through military, legal, and counterintelligence schools. Adler's name appeared in the acknowledgments as Captain S. Adler, record specialist, European theater. No biography. No photograph. No explanation that the method had been built in rain. In a jeep, with a card box on his knees and an execution order nailed to a schoolhouse door. Years later, after Adler died, his niece found the gray metal box wrapped in brown paper at the back of a closet. Most of the cards had been removed for official files, but one remained. Otto Weiss. The red card was worn soft at the edges. On the back, in Adler's small left-handed script, there were only 3 lines. Public copy recovered. Originals seized. System exposed. That was the victory he had wanted. Not applause. Not rank. Not a medal polished for a photograph. A closed file. A system made visible. A record that could not pretend innocence. Otto Weiss had believed the stamp made the murders official. Franz Kober had believed the archive made the system permanent. Both men were wrong for the same reason. They thought paper belonged to power. Samuel Adler understood something quieter and far more dangerous. Paper belongs to whoever reads it completely. The stamp made the murders official. The index cards made them answerable.